We are going to get started. It is just after 6 o'clock. Thanks for all of you taking time out of your Friday night to join us in conversation, get to know me a little bit. I want to thank Bernita for helping with moderation. And so I think we'll get ready to get started. So I will just jump right into my introduction and go into a little bit about me and my education experience professionally. So I'll just kind of jump right in. So my name is Natalie Bolin, and I am married to an incredible human being, Ben Bolin. We've been married for about 24 years. It'll be 25 this year. He is and has been my teammate and supporter through all of my accomplishments. We are parents of 2 amazing adult children. I'm not sure how that happened so quickly. Caleb is 21 and he lives in Texas. Our daughter Taylor is 18 and she is still at home and going to a community college. And we are also proud parents to 2 fur babies. We love our golden doodle and our Bernie doodle, and they bring a lot of joy in our life. I have been an elder's wife for 20 years plus, also a behavioral health director for our county's mental health system of care, executive director with the Advocates, also a professor at a university here in California. I do serve on a board of directors, and I'm an athlete, not currently because I don't have enough time in the day to compete any longer, but I do enjoy sports and traveling. So kind of moving into my education, I have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo here in California. I have a master's degree in social work, and I got that from Fresno State here in California. Forgot to mention that we live in California, Central Valley. I received my doctorate degree from University of Southern California, USC. And I'm currently a licensed clinical social worker. I've been licensed since 2012. My area of expertise is in trauma and addiction. I am EMDR certified, as well as trauma-focused CBT and seeking safety. A lot of my clinical work has been mostly with adults, but I did do some work with children. And professionally, I've been in this field for 27 years. I started working in social work before cell phones were even in place. We had good old handy pagers. But my work started with a nonprofit. So I worked in a domestic violence shelter, took crisis calls, helped manage the shelter. And then I spent the majority of my professional career in child protective services. And so I spent about 18 years in CPS. And when I started with CPS, I worked as an emergency response investigator. And so I would go out and investigate referrals, put together evidence, make those hard decisions around whether to remove kids from the home, and would also take cases to court. So I worked very closely with the juvenile court system. And then I worked a lot with families and reunification. I did most of my clinical work in this system of care. So we saw a ton of trauma. I specialized in sexual abuse cases, so very familiar in that area. And then so I kind of worked my way up in CPS and found myself in executive management, and then moved over to behavioral health about 5 years ago. So I started as the deputy director over behavioral health for our county, and I am currently the director of behavioral health. And so we oversee all of our clinics and inpatient. I have a crisis team that responds countywide. We have a ton of housing and a lot of support. So also I teach at university, or Fresno Pacific University. And so I teach in the social work department, which is a ton of fun. I love teaching. And so that's just a little bit about me individually and education. I do want to say, so I was raised in this fellowship. We do have meeting in our home. We have a Sunday morning meeting and a Wednesday night meeting, and we truly, truly value our fellowship meeting. But I can say that we are completely open, transparent with everyone about this crisis within our fellowship. And anyone else who will have a conversation with us. Both Ben and I believe in zero tolerance for perpetrators to be in the fellowship. And we're very clear about that. There may be some questions about that, and I'm happy to go into more detail with that. But I'll just kind of end with, my passion is really helping people. I absolutely love connecting with others, listening to their experience. Hearing the resilience of individuals is so inspiring. And so my passion really is learning each day from each other. And it's been an amazing journey. I can't lie, I'm kind of looking forward to retirement. I'd like to travel a little bit more, but it's been a great career. So with that, I'll kind of end it there, just with an overview of me.
Thanks, Natalie. Sorry for that little awkward start. I have a few questions for you to just kind of get us started. I had put together some questions kind of based on some of the things that people have been asking already. So first, as an elder's wife, history would indicate that accepting this position puts a target on your chest. For your loyalty to be questioned, for you to be mistrusted by the church. Have you found this to be true in any way? And do you have any concerns about being shunned or excommunicated?
So far the positive reactions have totally outweighed the negative reactions. There has been both. But I can say that positive reactions have come from those attending fellowship meetings and those that are no longer attending. Unfortunately, history has shown if you do stand up to the ministry or you disagree with the ministry, regardless if they're right or wrong, there is a risk of being excommunicated or having meetings taken out of homes. Both Ben and I we're working our way through the book, Preserving the Truth. We feel it's very important to understand our history. And from that, I'm observing patterns of behavior, especially with the ministry over a period of time. And so both Ben and I have discussed this at length, and we're willing for this risk. Our question has always been, how can anyone argue against keeping our fellowship safe and advocating and caring for our survivors? And honestly, if that's held against us, then so be it. When you think about trust goes both ways. And there's been a lot of conversation around trust and around betrayal. And for the last 9 months, I can say that I have really lost a lot, if not all, of trust with our ministry. And there's such a huge sense of betrayal. Many people that we talk to are not okay. People are not okay. And so the stages of grief are very real. And people are in different stages of grief at different times. And so when you think about, okay, what is the stages, or what are the stages of grief? We have our shock and denial, that initial stage. We have anger, unbelief. We have this space where it's called the bargaining stage, where we start making deals with God, or we start making deals with other people. There's depression, and then there's the resolution and acceptance. And these stages, they aren't linear. It's really easy to be in one stage and move to the next, and maybe even get to the acceptance and acceptance stage, and then go back to anger again. And so it's such a journey, grief. And I call this out because I think many people are just in different phases and in different places with this. And what we're going through, just with the ministry, I mean, it can't even compare to what our survivors go through. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why we just want to move on conversation doesn't go over very well. I mean, amongst other reasons. So just to kind of answer that and address that area of trust, like trust goes both ways. And trust has to be built over time, and sometimes it can't be built. And so I just maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So my second question, also as an elder's wife, you have a target on your back as you represent someone loyal to the workers and committed to the fellowship of your church, which you've already addressed that to some degree. And victims who no longer attend have expressed distrust in your ability to support victims and not employ the historical tactics of silencing, blaming victims. It's also been stated that as an elder's wife, that your loyalties are compromised and you can't be trusted to honor confidentiality. So again, what is your response to these concerns?
Yeah, all very valid concerns. So first off, I want to just start. I completely understand the reaction and mistrust that survivors have with anyone in this fellowship. It is true that survivors have been blamed and silenced for a very long time. And I am truly sorry that it has happened, and it is totally unacceptable, and it has to stop. And this is one of the most motivating factors of why Ben and I are taking such a strong stand. As far as loyalty, I can tell you where my loyalty isn't. I offer no loyalty to perpetrators. I owe no loyalty to those that have and are still covering up crimes. I'm not loyal to those that continue to keep their head in the sand and refuse to acknowledge the crisis that we're in. So that's where my loyalty isn't. So if you don't fall under one of those categories, then we can talk about me being loyal. But just looking at and addressing confidentiality. So I work under a license. I am a licensed clinical social worker. In California, my governing board is the Board of Behavioral Science. I follow the National Association of Social Work guidelines under confidentiality and protected health information. So I fully understand confidentiality. And if I do anything that breaks that, I could lose my license. So it is a very serious matter. I do want to note that there are limits to confidentiality. And when I was doing private practice, I would go over this with my clients, that I am mandated. So if there's a suspicion of child abuse or of elder abuse, then I do have to report. And so I would break confidentiality for that. And then we also have Tarasoth's law, which as a clinician, you have a legal duty to warn others if there is a danger. So if a client comes in and tells me that they have a plan and they are going to kill somebody, I have a duty to warn. So those are the very limited times where confidentiality is broken. The other area is if there is a signed release of information. And so that is time limited, it's very specific. And it's usually just done in clinical practice to coordinate care outside of your practice. So confidentiality is very serious, and I take it completely seriously.
Okay, thank you. I have two more questions before we're going to open it up for anybody else to ask questions. One is, with targets on your chest and on your back, why have you accepted this position?
I think it is so important to publicly take a stand against really criminal acts that have occurred in our fellowship. I think it's very important to set clear boundaries around what is not right. To me, there's a responsibility that comes with knowledge and awareness. I firmly believe that God is going to judge me for what I knew and how I responded to this crisis. And for me, what comes to mind is, am I hiding my education and my knowledge? Am I hiding that? No. I feel very strongly that, and both Ben and I are in this together, we're a team, and we feel very strongly that we need to take a firm stand.
Okay. My last question, I think you've kind of woven answers around it, but how you see yourself uniquely positioned and qualified to carry the vision of AFTT and move the organization forward in achieving its goals?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I talked about my education, I talked about my experience. I honestly feel like my career has kind of led to this point in a crazy way. Going back to the vision of Advocates for Truth. So, their vision is giving voice and protection to survivors. And so that I have a ton of experience around that. Exposure and accountability of perpetrators and justice to survivors. And this is the lane that Advocates is going to stay in. And so when you think about this vision, the structure of Advocates will really stay the same. There's two branches of Advocates. There's the hotline and investigation, and then there's survivor care. And so those are going to be the two branches of Advocates for Truth. There is a board of directors, there's an advisory board, and then we're currently building out teams under each branch. And so you might ask yourself, well, why is there a need to build out Advocates? The best way I can describe it is I just want you to imagine an iceberg. What you see above water does not compare to what is below the surface. And we have years of work ahead of us, both in investigation and in survivor care. And so these are, very big picture goals. There's a lot of details underneath that. But I honestly feel like my whole career has kind of led up to this point. And again, if there's specific questions about any of that, I'm happy to answer or try to.
All right. I'm going to just go over the ground rules for inviting questions. They are posted in the chat, at the very top of the chat. But to just keeping in mind that everybody's going to be muted except for when they're called on. So make sure you raise your hand, your electronic hand, and since this is an opportunity to get to know the executive director, Natalie of AFTT, in order to make best use of our time, please write your question down before you raise your hand. Make sure your question is fully formed, so you're not spending time forming it after you're called on. Questions only. Non-questions won't be permitted at this time. It's time to get to know Natalie, so it's not time for storytelling or giving advice. Please post any thank yous or comments, statements in the chat, and keep communication respectful. Mona is moderating the chat, and if you prefer, you can post questions there. And if we do not get to your questions tonight, you can email them to Natalie at AFTT. And that is true even if you posted it in the chat and we didn't get to it. Go ahead and send an email and she'll get back to you with that. And I think that covers it. So anybody with questions, you can raise your little hand and we'll go from there.
Yeah, would you call?
So does anybody have a question? I see Michael Martin. You go ahead and unmute.
This is Carol Martin. My question is, obviously, the home that she represents, the elder and his wife, it's considered a safe home. I want to know how she's communicated to the workers in her field so that they know that her home is considered a safe home. And is there going to be some education for other elders and their wives as to how to communicate with their workers about not having anybody in their home that's not safe?
That is a great question. So we have had multiple sit downs with our workers. I can say it's been a little rocky at first, but we just stay at the conversation. And during the conversation, we try to put our education hat on and have a good mix of facts to give to them. And then also very clearly state where we stand. And so we have had that. I can't say that it's difficult to know how much has been retained because the workers in our field have not been, I would say, very open to accepting the idea that we're in a crisis. So it is very frustrating. But we do continue on, we keep having the conversation. We have, I've had multiple conversations with our region's overseer and those that are in leadership, tried to do quite a bit of work at that level. It's one thing to have conversation with your local workers, but really you need to take that conversation up to leadership. And so we have had multiple conversations, education with the overseer and those in the top leadership. We keep pushing, and in our region is not progressive at all compared to what's happening in other areas. So we continue to push for listening sessions. We have asked and offered to put on a training for the staff in the California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii region. And so far, we haven't been taken up on our offer. So we're going to keep asking. So a great question.
It looks like we have a question in the chat. First, a follow-up on this question. Do you have your policy for a safe house in writing?
No, and that is a good question. And yeah, we don't, but we should. So good point.
Okay. And then what does your first 100 days look like? And what is it? And what is your long-term vision for AFTT?
Yeah. Well, I've been on the job for 18 days. And also a side note, so I have a full-time job during the day. So I'm able to give part-time to this role. And so the first 100 days, it is building out teams. So the donations coming in are going straight to survivor care. Long term, we need to do some diversification of our funds. So we are looking at different grants that we can write that gives out ongoing funding. And so really the 100 days is looking at where we can build out, where we need to, and where the need is. So there is a ton of need for survivor care and bringing in that clinical support. Lauren and Cynthia have done an amazing job. I can't even wrap my head around the work that they've done. And so bringing in that support to support them, Cynthia with ongoing investigation and our hotline, and then also with survivor care, building that out so that we can support our survivors ongoing.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. For those that need a little bit of how-to on the Zoom, on your toolbar of your Zoom call, there's a little button that says reactions. If you click on that button, you should be able to raise your hand in case you're wondering how to raise your hand. Yep, there's one. Go ahead, John Bowman.
I was reading on AFTT, I think it was a man that was mentioning it about we need to state these crimes for what they are. And I've recently had a visit with some friends of mine who seemed to go into a bit more detail around the crimes that belonged to Dean Brewer. And we saw on that letter from Doyle Smith right back in the beginning that Doyle named Dean as a sexual predator, but really that doesn't cover it. It doesn't really say what he did.
So what is your
so the question is, so what are the legalities about that? Like, what are the legalities about, are we able to actually put it out there exactly what Dean Brewer's crimes were? Are we legally able to do that?
So that's a really good question. And I'm probably going to have to do a follow-up back with you because the investigation falls under Cynthia Lyle's licensed. So she is a licensed private investigator. And I know that different states and even different countries have different regulations around that. And so I will follow up. We'll take this back. I really want Cynthia to weigh in. I don't want to give any misinformation around this. So I think it's an excellent question. And so we'll loop back and send this out. I do think you touch on a very important topic, and that is definitions. And so we had a communications team meeting yesterday where this came up, that our Advocates for Truth Facebook page, we really want it to be a factual, information-based page where there's education kind of interwoven into it. And so we even talked about yesterday of making posts around definitions that we're talking about, because I think there's misconceptions about what is pedophilia? What does it mean to be a sexual perpetrator? What is the definition of child sexual abuse? And someone even mentioned a couple weeks ago, or actually it was this week, on Bridging the Gap. Actually, we should be saying child sexual assault. And it's not just child sexual assault. We also have sexual assault, adult sexual assault. We have also seen behaviors around trafficking. And what does that mean? Human trafficking. And what are those definitions? So that is something that the communication team is going to be working towards and providing a lot more education around what these terms mean.
Okay. John, could you unraise your hand here? And then Tom.
You do that.
Thank you. In a couple of weeks, I will be hosting a meet and greet of people that are concerned. And one of the things that I want to do is to be able to draw out their concerns, their thoughts, their ideas. And I'm wondering if you have any tips and ideas about how best that I can do that. I want to have it it's in a live session and a group of people getting together, and mostly discussion and not so much presentations. I'm starting with a couple of presentations, short presentations, and then moving into a group discussion. So if anything you can suggest for that.
Just a couple quick questions for you. Is this a group where people know one another, or is this just an open group anyone can attend?
For the most part, we'll know each other.
Okay.
It's for the Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia fields, and so most of us know each other to some degree.
Okay.
So there may be some that don't.
Okay. I always think it's healthy when you get a group of people together to establish right off the bat, what are the goals of the conversation? Maybe it's starting off with you have 3 questions and you just want to get through 3 questions. What can happen when you have a group setting is it can get sidetracked really easy. So I would maybe advise that starting off with, and it can be, what are your worries or what are your top 3 concerns? And structure it that way. And then that way you'll get the information that you need to then move forward with following groups.
Okay, Mo, do you have a question for us?
Hi. I have several that have come through. Asking Natalie, what does your first 100 days look like? And what's your long-term vision for advocates?
I think she covered that one.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do you have a job description? If so, what is it? And is it a paid position?
Great question. So yes, we do have an executive director job scope. It's about 5 pages long, so I'm happy to share that. And it is not a paid position. I decided to not take pay. It was offered, and I felt like pay should go towards survivor care.
Okay.
So as of today, it's not a paid position.
The next question I have, and I'm presenting these to you, Natalie, as they come in. So
Perfect. Yeah.
we're kind of jumping around on topics. What's your advice for addressing overseers who openly state that they do not support a written policy?
Number one, it's super frustrating. So it's educating, it's putting on the education hat and making sure that we are working from the same landscape. we have found that in our conversations, overseers, workers, many in the fellowship, they are not working from the same landscape that the rest of us that are trying to be informed are working from. So sometimes when there's resistance, we have to go back to, I don't know, I think it's step one of that education piece. Making sure they understand the statistics, where we're coming from, why we are concerned. And, and it may get to the point where you can't have any further conversation because they've just, they've closed off. I can tell you that part of my first 100 days is sending the Predator book by Ann Salter. And she is a forensic psychologist. And she works with perpetrators within the prison system. And it's a hard book to read, but it is a great book to understand why everyone is so concerned about having perpetrators in our fellowship. And so how I'm approaching this is, again, through the education lens of sending this book. There's been, I'm losing my words, but we have a therapist that did a book study. And so it's a 3-page book study that I'm going to include along with a letter explaining why I'm sending this book, because there seems to be a huge misunderstanding of the issue that we are trying to address.
Okay. Next question. Why are many workers using guidelines instead of policy? Is it per legal guidance?
So we had a discussion about this in our communications team as well, and we're going to try to address this in the next couple of weeks as well. But, it's when you have a policy, and we, coming from like a government agency, I have policies in place for everything that we do. It holds us accountable to our contracts. It holds us accountable to our funding streams. It holds us accountable to the clients that we're serving. Guidelines doesn't have that accountability with it. And to me, guidelines are just suggestions. So it kind of takes away the accountability piece versus if you have a policy. What we've heard is that there are some regions that are backing away from policy because they could be held legally accountable for not following that policy. It speaks to more of an organization. And so I think that's why there's this movement away from policy into guidelines.
I'm going to jump to a question that's closely related to what you're talking about now, Natalie. What questions are you specifically asking the ministers? Do you feel they're answering them or being vague or skirting your question?
All of the above. So we've had a listening session here in California. I feel like from the conversations I've been involved in, they haven't been answering questions honestly, and that is a concern. If you can't answer a question honestly about this topic, I mean, what else? That trust factor, lack of trust just keeps getting reinforced, unfortunately. What I hear is, well, we don't have the facts. We don't go on the internet. We're not going to go on the internet. So they kind of are very defensive around that area. which is very frustrating. And my response back is, well, if you wanted to look up something, if you wanted to find out what's going on in Ukraine, well, what do? How do you get your information? You go on the internet or you look up news reports. And so to me, that's just not a great excuse. So it is frustrating that, and it's not just our workers in the ministry, it's everyone, that people aren't being informed. There's a whole bunch of different avenues to be informed through. So we're in the 20th century. The internet is where we get the majority of our information. So I push back a lot on that. I also provide stats and I provide information. And I've had numerous conversations from a clinical perspective, as an attendee of fellowship meetings. And so, yeah, it's ongoing. I feel like we sometimes take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And so it definitely is this back and forth.
Rick Dow has a question. Hand raised. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Rita.
Hello.
It's Cindy Doherty.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Just the first 3 letters of your last name. So my first question is there any reason why a single guideline can't be adopted worldwide for continuity?
That is a wonderful question. And I wish I could say, yeah, let's do it. So when you take a step back and you look through the lens of system theory, so our church, the Truth Fellowship, 2x2s, that's kind of the umbrella. What is really interesting is that, and somebody brought this up in the advisory board, so I'm not taking credit for this thought, is that every region functions like its own franchise. So if you think about Subway, we all know what Subway does. They make great sandwiches. But every Subway franchise can be ran a little bit differently. Their management is different. What sales they put on are different. What coupons they honor are different. Very similarly in our church is the same way. And so when you start talking about one policy or one guideline, that means that every single franchise, every single region has to be of the same mindset. And we're not. We hear the East Coast versus the West Coast versus different areas. And so we function very differently. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we can't have an overarching policy. We don't even have overseers that are agreeing with one another. You have overseers in, Texas region that are really doing some great work in trying to address this, but then in overseers in California, we're not even talking. And so when you have that vast difference, that's the reason why we can't have a policy. We're not on the same page.
I would add that that's one of the places of addressing honesty,
Yes.
which we haven't seen, because the false narrative is that we're all united across the world. It's all united and one. And we just know that that is not the case. And it really never has been the case. So that's been a lack of integrity that we have been on the receiving end of for years, probably since day one. So,
A really great question.
okay. Cindy, did you have another question? Follow up on that?
Yeah, follow up on that. So my husband and I are from California. A year ago, we retired and moved to Virginia. Since moving to Virginia, we've learned that there is a level of hierarchy above what you would call an overseer. So from the best we can tell, because this is all a little mysterious, there are 3 overseers for all of North America. If that's the case, why can't 3 people get together and say, in North America, this is the way it's going to be done. We always obey the overseers, right? So if those 3 said, we are united on this, this is how it's going to be done in every state, in every province of Canada, it would be done. So I don't understand what the problem is there.
I'm just going to insert here that we really need to keep the focus on AFTT, and Natalie can't fix what's not happening right amongst the overseers. And
I wish I could.
I think several of us wish that we could. But so let's make sure we keep this focused on what is under Natalie's purview and going forward with that. Michael, you have your hand raised. Michael, have it. Unmute yourself. Michael, are you there? Michael, if you're talking, you are muted.
While we wait, can I jump in with a question?
Yes.
Regarding AFTT, will the restructuring be released publicly, such as who is on the board of directors, advisory board, etc.?
When we're still building all of this. So when we talk about organization structure and board of directors and advisory committee and what the organization chart looks like, we can't release anything yet. We're still working through that. And we're still building that. So yeah, once that's done, we're happy to share what our structure looks like. And but it's just we're building it as we speak. And so we'll be happy to come back and have further conversation about our org chart and funding streams and all those things. So yeah, good question. That's the fun part is building the system of care.
If there's time, here's one more regarding AFTT. What can a person do other than donating to become involved in helping AFTT in their work?
Contact me directly. I am happy to have a conversation and talk through what areas you might be passionate about. It has absolutely been amazing how many people have stepped up and they want to donate their time. Almost overwhelmingly so. I know I haven't gotten to everyone, but please, you can reach out to me. I'll be happy to have a conversation and talk through what areas you're passionate about or you're interested in their space. So thanks for asking.
Julia Taylor, you had your hand raised. I could see it went away. Do you still have a question?
I did know the question you had just asked. I was going to ask how we could support.
Okay, perfect. And Michael Habit, did you unmute yourself? Nope. Okay. Mo, do you have another question?
I do. Now that a list of many predators has been gathered, what is the next step for AFTT? How do we move beyond gathering to disseminating information for safety? Is there still a plan to build a web-based database that is searchable by people like us? And that the answer to this will answer several other ones who've asked the same question, just different words.
Yeah. So that is something that we are working through. It is on our radar, on the to-do list, because we completely believe in transparency. And also we have to balance that there is an investigation taking place. And sometimes Cynthia's investigations, they get turned over to law enforcement. And so it's finding that fine balance of what we can release under Cynthia's license, and that information. But there's been some really good ideas generated on how we can do this in the future. And so more to come regarding this, but it is on our to-do list, looking at how we set it up. Again, I'm not taking credit for this, but there's been some really great ideas about even possibly just searching a name, and if their name comes up green, good to go. If they come up a different color, oh, I need to reach out to advocates. So again, we're going to work through this, and we want to make sure that everything we do is legal. And so more to come on that, but really good question.
Anybody else want to ask your question audibly? Raise your hand. We'll go to the next one on Mo's list. Go ahead, Mo.
Sorry, I needed to unmute. Another question about paid positions. And there's something a little more specific. Let me just find that question. Oh, the additional investigators joining Cynthia. Can you say any more about them?
That is still that's still in the works. As far as paid positions, so we're looking at diversifying our funding. Again, I want to stress that donations made to advocates are going straight to survivor care. There's a need for that. As far as paid positions within the organization, we're looking at grants and being grant funded. And so there is, and we have, because we're international and because we're national, we have to look at federal grants to cover all the states. So that is what we've built an awesome grants team. The people on our grants team are just out of this world. And so we are currently in the process of writing 2 federal grants, and grants don't get all released at the same time. And so we'll continue to monitor as grants get released throughout the year. And then we also know that when you start writing grants, you kind of have to structure it where, you're covered for 2 to 3 years, and then the timing of the grant. And so there's that sustainability plan in place. And so that's really what we're looking at the future. And if these grants come through, which I think they will, then we'll start looking at more paid positions.
You want me to bring the next question?
First, Galen Grillo.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for doing this tonight. Can you talk any more about the relationship with Fund Recovery and how you're leveraging all the work that they're doing?
Yeah. So such a wonderful organization. Their network is amazing. So how I can best explain it is that when you donate to advocates, we work with a third-party vendor, so Fund Recovery and Little Hooves. Our dollar goes a lot further when we partner with a third-party vendor. They have the network established they also have the support established. What sets advocates apart is that we bridge the gap from when a survivor contacts us and says, I need help with treatment, and that referral goes over to Fund Recovery, or it might go through a different avenue depending on how the survivor wants that. Sometimes they want to go through their insurance. Sometimes they want to stay local. Advocates will bridge that gap and support that survivor every step of the way until that survivor is hooked up with treatment, and then continues to support the survivor while they're in treatment. A lot of times when you work with a hotline or you work with a referral company, they'll just refer you over, and then that's it. There's not that ongoing support. And so that's when we talk about communal care and wrapping ourselves around survivors as they're walking through, either through treatment or as they're trying to get connected with treatment. What we have found a lot is that there's a lot of education that goes on in between where people don't know what to expect, especially the first time accessing treatment. It's kind of scary, to be honest. And there's still stigma around getting therapy, especially in our fellowship. And so Fund Recovery, they are very connected and they can stretch our dollar further. So it's it's pairing with level of care. So one survivor may need a therapist that is trained in EMDR. Another survivor may need inpatient care. Those are two very different levels of care. And so advocates will help people maneuver through that and walk with them so that they can get the correct level of care that they need.
Go ahead, Mo, with another question.
This is a long one, so I'm going to paraphrase. Understanding that overseers are really controlling the church and the system as a whole, do you see them working with you on any goals? Do you see true, authentic change happening, or the intention?
That's a really good question. So in my current position as a behavioral health director, I'm very familiar with power structure and knowing who to talk to, either politically or somebody that might be a director, executive, understanding that power structure and applying it to the overseers, understanding. And so it is having conversations directly with the overseers. And again, I have had more conversations with just the California overseer or California region overseer, but my goal is to reach out to every single overseer and make connections. They'll at least get a book from me. So they might appreciate the book, they might not, but we'll try. But my intention is to have direct conversation with overseers as the executive director of advocates, but also as Dr. Bolin with an expertise in this area. And so that is, when you talk about the first 100 days, that's on the to-do list too.
Isabel, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello. I had a question about, I was wondering, is there a mission and vision statement for Advocates for Truth?
So we have a mission statement and it is on our website. So
Okay.
it's listed under, but I will tell you, I'm currently working on a theory of change document that we will share once it gets completed. And so it's looking at the challenges that advocates are addressing. It's looking at our focus of change So that's divided up into identifying and investigating perpetrators within the fellowship and then supporting survivors. With that, we will have guiding principles. And so there is 5 guiding principles that we've included in our theory of change. So and I'll just list out the 5. I won't go into a lot of detail because this will be eventually online. But our guiding principles is compassion and love. That we connect with people regardless of whether they are attending meetings or not. We believe in autonomy. And so the respect that individuals have the capacity to heal. And the next area is dignity. Another guiding principle is building trust and collaboration. And then our other area is justice. And we might have a couple more to add, but what's helpful about those guiding principles is then it leads us into our organizational strategies. So what is it that advocates is going to do? And then next to that is anticipated outcomes within a certain time frame. So when we talk about our hotline and our investigation, our anticipated outcome is that survivors will continue to reach out and report. Our survivor care, of course, that is something that's just as, if not more important. And what are our anticipated outcomes? That we connected a certain percentage to treatment, that we can build that out, what that's going to look like. And so we will list out our organizational strategies and then our outcomes. And then that's what we can be measured. Like, did we meet them? Did we not? And if not, what is it that we need to tweak? And so that holds the organization accountable, and it creates that transparency of, what we're setting out to do and making sure that we stay in our lane. It's really easy to get sidetracked, for sure. But that document will be available.
Okay, great. Yeah, that sounds good. Do I have time for follow-up to that, or I don't want to hog the floor?
Short follow-up.
Okay, do you have any plans to include other forms of abuse other than SA and CSA in your scope of work?
Right now, we are. So what's interesting is that even though we are focusing on CSA and SA, other types of abuse are secondary. So whether it's domestic violence, whether it's financial abuse. So we can't say, no, we're just focusing on CSA and SA, because really it's all inclusive when you look at it. Yes, of course, our focus is on CSA and SA, but all the other ones are the secondary.
I don't have a name. I just have users iPhone raised hands. So you're the only one with your hand raised. Go ahead. Unmute. You have your hand raised. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, you know what? I didn't know that I had that on there, but I do have questions. And I might have missed it because I was trying to sign in, but I was just wondering personally how she takes care of herself in this, dealing with this kind of information all day. Is that a fair question for this?
It is totally a fair question. Yeah. So you might be surprised to hear this. I believe in good sleep hygiene, is what I call it. So I do get enough sleep at night, number one. Self-care is important. I love to travel. Both Ben and I absolutely love to travel. And so I find joy in planning our different trips. So we've got a big one coming up this summer that we're super excited about. So I use that as self-care. I used to play roller derby, and that was pretty competitive and pretty physical. The pandemic sort of forced us to hang up our skates a little bit, but I did turn to that for self-care. So physical activity, and so forth. And there's some days where I have just really bad days, and that's okay. Recognizing that I need a timeout, I need a break, I need to give my brain a break, and respecting that. So I don't do it perfectly, by any means, but I might get back on my skates. I'm still considering that.
Yeah, Mo, do you have another question?
I have a good question, and I'm going to paraphrase again. So this comes from Alicia. If I don't ask this right, please unmute yourself and jump in. In Alaska, Washington area, they have an advocacy team, and they're trying to bridge gaps, figuring out how to get factual information to those who are afraid of the internet, and also wondering if you have advice for how to gain trust from anyone who doesn't want to listen to someone other than their current field worker.
That's a really good question. And I would love to take this back to my communications team to kind of strategize around that. I have an amazing team that represents all generations and audiences. So I want to give justice to your question. So I'd like to take that back because I think it's relevant to not just Alaska and Washington, but relevant strategies, like communication strategies is what I'm hearing, that could be used across the regions. So I think that's a good like homework assignment. I'm writing it down for my to-do.
Mo, do you have any more questions?
One more that hasn't already been asked. Asking about current PTSD. Let me find it so I can ask it word for word. If the person who's asking about the PTSD treatments, if you're still on, you can jump in and ask your question because I'm scrolling through here and I can't find you again. But that's the one that hasn't been addressed yet.
And if anyone has a specific treatment question, they can reach out to me. I'm happy to have that conversation. I will say that I highly refer. So for trauma therapy, if you are looking for a trauma therapist, please make sure they're certified in providing trauma treatment. Sometimes therapists will say that they do treat trauma, but they don't have the training behind it. So we like to recommend EMDR. We like to recommend trauma-focused CBT. There's quite a few. There's a couple other names that are escaping me. My brain's getting tired. But please reach out, and we're happy to give resources around that.
It is 8:12 my time, so that's 7:12 your time, I guess. And I believe that the posted end time was 2 minutes ago. And are you ready for me to wrap it up? Okay. So there are some questions that I believe have come through the chat that did not get answered. And so scroll all the way up to the top where there is a message from AFTT with at the bottom of it is the email, advocatesforthetruth@gmail.com. If you had questions that we did not get to, either in the chat or if you never posted them, please send them to Natalie via email, and she will get back to you on that. Do you have a time frame on that, Natalie?
I will try to get back within the next week. Yeah, depending on how many questions. If there's lots of questions, but I'll make sure to get back. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Natalie, for all your responses.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for moderating, Bernita. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone coming out on a Friday night. This is great. Great conversation.
Right. Thank you.